The slap landed before I even had time to blink. One sharp crack that sliced through the ballroom of the Harbor Light Grand and froze 250 wedding guests in their seats. I tasted metal at the corner of my mouth, felt the sting rise across my cheek, and watched my sister Marissa stare at me like I had ruined her entire future with one simple refusal. I was still standing at the microphone when it happened. The ballroom lights bounced off the crystal vases on the tables and the soft gold drapery behind me. The ocean was only a short walk away, close enough that I could hear waves sliding against the break wall when the music dipped. Everything was gorgeous. Everything had been planned down to the breath, and somehow I had become the center of the spectacle Marissa wanted, but not in the way she expected. Only minutes before the slap, the wedding coordinator had approached me with a bright smile and said that the bride wanted me to come forward and say a few words about my gift. I had told her quietly that there must be a misunderstanding, that I had already given my gift. But the coordinator insisted. The bride specifically requested it. So I walked toward the stage, unhappy but unwilling to make a scene in the middle of her reception. Marissa waited for me with her hands clasped in front of her body swaying slightly from adrenaline and champagne. Evan stood behind her, smiling politely, not knowing what was about to unfold. Guests lifted their phones, thinking this was some heartfelt moment between sisters. And maybe in some twisted way, Marissa thought it would be. She always acted like a spotlight. "Tell everyone about the special wedding gift you prepared." Her voice had a bright trill to it, the kind she used when she was trying to control a room. Her eyes flicked toward me, sharp and demanding. She was not asking. She was directing the scene. I looked at her, and then at the microphone, and I knew exactly what she was trying to force. She wanted me to announce that I was giving her my oceanfront condo. She wanted me to wrap up the biggest thing I owned, the last piece of the life I once had, and offer it on a silver platter so she could feel like the favored sister for everyone to witness. She wanted applause. She wanted admiration. She wanted a fairy tale entrance into her marriage. But I told her no. Plain and steady. No, you do not need that condo. You have your own life ahead of you. I already gave you my gift. I could feel my voice carry through the speakers, soft but firm. I did not raise it. I did not tremble. I simply held the truth in place. Marissa froze for a moment. Her smile quivered. Then her face cracked open like something rotten beneath a polished surface. She stepped closer, enough that the guests could hear her even without the microphone. Her voice climbed, thick with disbelief and rage. "You have been alone for years. I am getting married." I deserved it more. Hearing her say it out loud, in front of 250 people, felt like someone opened a window on a freezing night. Her words were not about a condo. They were about her belief that my life was less valuable than hers, that my grief, my widowhood, my quiet existence made me an open bank drawer she could tug from whenever she wanted. In her mind, she was the one beginning a new chapter. She deserved everything. I deserved nothing. She reached for me then, not gently, not accidentally. It was impulsive and furious, a strike fueled by entitlement and humiliation. Her hand connected with my face and everything inside the ballroom went silent. You could hear forks drop. You could hear a collective gasp. You could hear the ocean outside, steady and indifferent. I touched my cheek lightly, not to soothe the sting, but as if confirming that this really happened, that my sister had hit me at her own wedding because I would not hand her the home my husband and I once dreamed of sharing. Phones lifted in the air, screens glowed, guests whispered heatedly behind their hands. Evan looked pale, but did not say a word. Before I go any further, let me pause for a moment. I always like knowing what people are doing when they listen to stories like this. It makes everything feel a little more human. So if you feel like it later, tell me in the comments. When all of this happened, I was standing under those ballroom lights while the air around my shoulders turned cold, even though the room was warm. When I looked back at the crowd, my vision caught a woman seated near the far left table. She was older, maybe in her 60s, with silver hair pulled neatly behind her ears. Her expression was not horrified like the others. It was attentive, focused, watchful. She did not lift her phone. She did not whisper. Her eyes held mine for a few seconds, calm but piercing, as if she saw more than the moment itself. I did not know her name then, but later I would learn it. Naomi Whitaker. And she would become one of the few people who understood what had truly happened that night. But at that moment, I did not think about her. I did not think about the guests, or the music that had cut off abruptly, or my sister breathing hard in front of me. I simply knew something inside me had shifted. Something quiet, but final. For most of my life, I had been the fixer, the rescuer, the older sister who stepped in whenever Marissa stumbled. I had been the one who steadied her through debts, bad relationships, late rent, car trouble, and emotional storms. I thought that was what family meant. I thought that was love. But standing under the lights with my cheek burning, I understood that she had never seen it as love. She had seen it as an obligation, a resource, a role I was expected to play. And I was finished playing it. I lowered the microphone slowly. My hand did not shake. The weight of it felt suddenly insignificant, like shedding something I no longer needed. I placed it back on the stand and stepped away, ignoring the hands reaching toward me and the guests calling my name. Marissa was speaking behind me, but I did not look back. Her voice sounded distant, shrill, and scattered, like the wind catching on a loose skate. As I walked off the stage, the ballroom lights dimmed behind me. The chatter swelled again, not loud, but tense and electric. I could hear snippets. Did she really hit her? Did she expect her to give away her condo? What kind of sister does that? Who does she think she is? The hotel hallway felt cooler than the ballroom. I stopped for a moment, near the large window overlooking the ocean. The waves rolled in slow and steady, uncaring about the chaos behind me. I pressed my fingertips to my cheek. The sting had softened, but the truth it delivered had not. That was the moment I stopped rescuing her. I did not know what the fallout would be yet. I did not know about the manipulation that would follow, or the lies she would tell, or the legal battle she would attempt to start. I did not know that I would soon be defending not only my home, but my sanity and autonomy. All I knew in that quiet hallway was that something had snapped clean inside me. Not broken, released. I took one last breath, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the exit. I left the ballroom without looking back at my sister, the crowd, or the ruined reception. I left without apologizing, without explaining, without offering comfort to the people who pretended to care. I left because it was the only act of self-respect I had strength for in that moment. I did not know then just how far she would take things next. But walking out into the night after that slap, feeling the cold air settle against my burning cheek, pulled me back into a part of my life I had spent years trying to carry quietly. That sting did not just belong to the wedding. It pulled open an older bruise, one that had settled beneath my ribs long before my sister decided she deserved them. Last piece I had left. The hurt did not begin in that ballroom. It began much earlier, in the shadows of a life that had already been thinned by loss, before everything fractured. There had been a time when our family felt whole in ways that seem impossible now. I can still picture Dad coming home from the shop, smelling like grease and the pine-scented hand soap he always kept in the truck. He would lean back into his chair at the kitchen table with a deep exhale, not from exhaustion, but from a kind of gratitude. Being home meant he did not have to pretend. Mom would look up from whatever she was cooking and offer him the soft smile she looked out, saved for him alone. For those few minutes each evening, the world outside felt manageable, safe, steady. Our little family had a rhythm that never seemed like it would break. Marissa and I were already very different even then. I was the one who remembered chores without being told twice, the one who double-checked the locks before bed, the one who sat beside Dad to help him sort bills even though I barely understood what any of the numbers meant. It was not my responsibility exactly. It was more like an early understanding that someone needed to keep things together. Marissa drifted through those same days with a lightness I sometimes envied. She never worried about consequences because someone always seemed ready to catch whatever she let fall. She lived as if the world would bend to cushion her. And in our family, it often did. When my dad passed away, the blow hit so hard it rearranged the air. It came with a phone call in the middle of an ordinary day, and everything after that felt slightly tilted. Mom tried to hold on. She kept cooking, kept tidying, kept pretending that the house still felt the same. But grief is slow, and heavy. It softens the edges of a person, wears them down grain by grain until you look up and realize you have been watching them disappear. By the time we lost her too, Marissa and I were standing inside a house filled with memories but emptied of direction. The walls looked familiar, but the foundation of our lives had shifted. I stepped into the place I thought I was meant to fill, the steady one, the one who would shoulder whatever needed to be held. Marissa stepped closer to me and never really stepped back. Then came Daniel. If I close my eyes, I can still see the first evening we talked. The moment itself was nothing spectacular. Just two people sitting across from each other in a small bar after work. The kind of place with dim lights and a television humming quietly in the corner. I do not even remember what we laughed about, only that the way he listened made the room feel warmer. He carried himself with a calm that settled the air around him. Talking to him felt like taking a deep breath I did not realize I had been holding since Dad died. He never rushed me, never tried to fix me. He just listened, gently and fully. And somehow, that was enough. Our life together became a kind of quiet sanctuary. We took short trips when we could, nothing extravagant, just small escapes that let the world fade for a while. On Sundays, we cooked breakfast too late in the day, letting the smell of coffee drift through the apartment. Sometimes we talked about the future, not in big dramatic gestures, but in soft, steady hope. What the next few years might look like, where we might live, what kind of life we could build if we kept putting one foot in front of the other. One weekend, we were driving along the coast when we pulled over near a building with wide balconies facing the water. The air smelled like salt and warm stone. The sunlight made the ocean shimmer in a way that felt almost unreal. Daniel nudged my shoulder and said he could picture us living somewhere like that someday. Waking up to waves instead of alarms, drinking coffee while the morning light washed across the rooms. We stood there with the wind brushing past us, imagining a home that felt reachable, like something two people who loved each other could create with patience and time. Then the accident in the year 2018 shattered that hope in a single afternoon. I remember the weight of my phone when it rang and the strange stillness in the hospital hallway. I remember the doctor walking toward me with a face that told the truth before any words formed. The first wave of grief does not arrive like sorrow. It arrives like a blow that knocks the air out of you. I walked out of that hospital feeling hollowed out, carrying the shape of a future that no longer existed. People tried to help in the only ways they knew. They brought flowers and casseroles. They offered condolences meant to soften the edges of grief. I thanked them. I kept going to work. I paid bills. I kept living because that was what life demanded. But inside, everything felt frozen behind a wall of something thick and unmoving. The world kept shifting while I stayed suspended in a place between before and after. The settlement came months later, $2 million. A number that made neighbors raise their brows and whisper words like fortune and blessing. They did not understand. To me, it was the numerical expression of loss, a sum attached to the unfillable space Daniel left behind. It was not wealth. It was my responsibility. It was the life we would never finish building. Still, I kept working. I kept my routines. But the thought of that coastline lingered. One weekend, without planning it, I drove back to the building Daniel and I had stood in front of. The unit with the water view was empty. I walked through it slowly, listening to the echo of my footsteps. When I stepped onto the balcony, the ocean breeze lifted my hair, and for a brief second, I felt something soft and familiar. Something that reminded me of breathing freely. I bought the condo for $740,000. It was not an impulse. It was not an attempt to cling to the past. It was a way of grounding myself again, a way of honoring the plans Daniel and I once whispered about. Living there made me feel connected to him in a way that did not drown me. Watching the sunrise each morning reminded me that life moved forward, even if I sometimes wished it would pause long enough to let me catch up. Marissa visited not long after I settled in. She stepped inside slowly, taking in the open layout and the way the afternoon light spread across the floor. She walked out onto the balcony and looked at the ocean the same way someone looks at something they believe could be theirs. She picked up the glass of iced tea I had set out and took a slow sip while keeping her gaze fixed on the water. "This is kind of big for one person," she said lightly, her voice sliding between teasing and something sharper. "Too big for a widow." The word widow hit harder than she seemed to realize. It wrapped around my ribs and pressed. I forced a smile and said I liked the space. I said it felt peaceful. She nodded, still scanning the view, and said she guessed it made sense that I would want a place that reminded me of him. Then she added that maybe someday I would be ready to move on and find somewhere more practical, somewhere less emotional. Her tone was airy, but her eyes stayed on the ocean, as if measuring the distance between my life and hers. I felt something shift inside me, so small I almost convinced myself it was nothing. At the time, I pushed her comment aside. She had always been careless with words, tossing half-formed thoughts into the air without considering how they might land. I told myself that was all this was, just another loose comment carried by the wind. But that evening, after she left, I sat on the balcony and watched the last of the light fade across the water. Her words kept replaying in my mind. Too big for one person. Too big for a widow. Practical someday. Move on. It was the first time I wondered if she saw the condo not as my home, but as something she might someday claim for herself. Looking back now, that was the first crack in the foundation of what would come. A hairline fracture. Easy to ignore, but quietly widening beneath the surface. A sign that the ground between us had already started to shift. I did not recognize it then. I did not understand how deep it would go. I only knew that a strange unease had settled in my chest, and I could not quite name it. Not yet. Not until everything began to unravel. I had no idea then how quickly that crack would widen. It happened slowly at first, almost gently, the way a shoreline erodes under years of tide. You notice a shift, a thinning of something that once felt solid, but you tell yourself it is nothing. You tell yourself it will stop on its own. That is how it was with Marissa and me. Every small request, every crisis, every need felt like a single drop of water. It took a long time for me to understand how deep the erosion had already gone. After Mom and Dad were gone, I stepped into a role I never fully questioned. I was the older sister, the steady one, the one who showed up when the world shook beneath our feet. Marissa knew this, leaned into it, wrapped herself in the comfort of it. At first it felt like love, like loyalty, like family doing what family should. But the line between helping and enabling is thin, and I crossed it long before I realized it. The first major moment came late one night when my phone rang. It was almost midnight. Marissa's voice trembled on the other end. She had been in a car accident. A minor one, she insisted, quickly, desperately. She was not hurt, just shaken. The car was not so lucky. When I pulled into the small parking lot behind her building, the front end of her sedan was crumpled like a crushed can, and she sat on the curb, hugging her knees. Mascara streaked across her face. She folded into me as soon as I stepped out. She said she had panicked and did not know who else to call. She said she could not afford repairs or a new vehicle, and she would lose her job if she could not get to work. She said all the things people say when they feel cornered and afraid. I bought her a replacement car the next day. Not a luxury car, a reliable used sedan, priced fairly, safe and simple. She cried when I handed her the keys. She promised she would pay me back, even though we both knew deep down that she would not. At the time, I did not mind. I had the settlement money. She had lost Mom and Dad, just like I had. Helping her felt like honoring them. It felt like doing what I believed they would have wanted. A few months later, she called again. This time, it was credit cards. She had fallen behind. Interest was piling up. She said it was just this once. She said she had learned her lesson. She said she just needed to clear the slate so she could start fresh. She cried again. I paid the balance that night. She texted a brief thanks the next morning, the kind that looks warm but lands cold. Then it was the rent. She called saying she had miscalculated, that her landlord was threatening eviction. She said she could not bear the embarrassment. She said Evan had been between paychecks. She said she was doing her best. I wired her the money. She sent a heart emoji that felt like a placeholder for gratitude she no longer felt obligated to express. Over the next year, the pattern grew roots. Groceries, utility bills, gas, unexpected expenses, cell phone upgrades, a weekend trip she suddenly could not afford. medical bills for a sprained ankle, admission fees for job training courses she never finished. I stepped in each time because it felt easier to fix a problem than let my sister suffer. It felt like duty. It felt like compassion. It felt like my responsibility as the one who had been given money tied to tragedy. Marissa learned quickly that I would say yes. And once she learned that, she never went back to asking with hesitation. One afternoon, she visited the condo while Evan was at work. She walked through the rooms with a familiarity that unsettled me, tracing her fingers along the countertop, opening the sliding door to the balcony without asking. She stood there looking at the horizon and sighed dramatically. "This place is really something," she said, not turning toward me. "Must be nice not having to worry about money now that you have that settlement just sitting there." Those words startled me. Sitting there, as if the $2 million was gathering dust in a corner, as if it existed for her benefit, not for the life Daniel and I had built together. I tried to tell myself she did not mean anything by it. People say careless things all the time, but somewhere in my chest, something tightened. As the months passed, her language shifted. Help became an expectation. Requests became instructions. The tone of her voice changed, too. Softer at first, then firmer. Eventually the pauses disappeared, and she stopped pretending she feared being a burden. She started calling less often to check on me and more often to inform me of what she needed. Her sentences no longer carried a question. They carried a number. "I need this amount. Can you send it tonight?" Once she called while grocery shopping. She said funds were tight again. She said she and Evan had been budgeting carefully, but things were just hard right now. She paused, waiting. I hesitated for a moment, and in that tiny pause, she inhaled sharply, surprised, almost offended. She reminded me, gently but firmly, that family supports each other. She said she would do the same for me. I knew she believed that, even if it was not true. The moment I sent the transfer, she sighed in relief and moved on to talking about weekend plans. I sat on the couch staring at my phone long after the conversation ended, feeling something unfamiliar in my chest. It took me a long time to understand it was resentment. Things escalated further when she officially moved in with Evan. He worked in real estate, or that was how he introduced himself. In reality, he drifted between listings and part-time gigs, waiting for the next commission that never seemed to come. Their combined income was unstable, and unstable people lean heavily on those who are steady. Marissa's calls became more frequent. She said utilities were too high. She said groceries cost too much. She said she had bought new clothes for job interviews and needed help covering rent again. She said Evan was doing his best. She said she hated asking. Her voice did not sound like someone who hated asking. Slowly, she dropped the pretense of promising repayment. She stopped mentioning the future. She stopped apologizing. She started saying, "I figured you could help," or "I knew you would not let us go under," or "Given everything you have, this should not be a problem." That last one lodged itself into my ribs. Given everything you have. As if I had come into wealth through ease rather than losing the one person who steadied my world. As if that money were a prize. As if grief came with dividends. One night she came over for dinner. Evan joined us. He sat quietly while she talked. She walked through the condo like she was reacquainting herself with a place she'd used to live. She opened the fridge without asking, poured herself wine from a bottle I had not offered, and finally settled onto the couch with the unshakable confidence of someone in a home that should have been theirs. She looked around, her eyes moving from the windows to the kitchen to the hallway. "You do not really use all this space," she said simply. "You live alone." "It is kind of wasted, Nat." My name in her mouth felt different then, slightly condescending. Slightly familiar in a way I did not invite. I reminded her that this space held memories, that Daniel and I had planned for it, that it grounded me in a life that had been torn apart. She waved her hand as if brushing off nostalgia. "That was years ago," she said. "You have to move on at some point." Evan watched me carefully. He said nothing, but his silence felt like agreement. Time went on. Each request from her grew shorter, more direct, more entitled. There was a day when she needed money for car maintenance, another day when she needed help paying for a medical bill she did not fully explain, another day when she said Evan had missed a commission and they were short again. And each time she did not ask if I could help. She told me what she needed. That was the shift. That tiny but pivotal shift. I realized it clearly one afternoon as I sat in my living room, the ocean outside rolling lazily under a soft blue sky. My phone buzzed. It was Marissa. Her message read, "I need this amount today. Let me know when you send it." No explanation, no greeting, no question mark. It hit me harder than all the requests that came before it. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being her sister and had become her safety net. Not one she appreciated, but one she expected. One she believed she was entitled to. And sitting there with the sunlight stretching across my floor, I felt a quiet finality settle into my bones. I was no longer being asked whether I could help. I was only being told how much was required. And once Marissa crossed that line without hesitation, it was only a matter of time before she pushed harder, reaching for the one thing she had wanted from the beginning. The condo stopped being a running joke the moment her realized her small requests no longer startled me. Now that I had become her solution to every problem, she no longer bothered to pretend she was teasing when she talked about my home. She said the words plainly, with a kind of casual confidence that made my stomach feel tight. One afternoon, she stopped by without calling first. I had been watering the small row of plants I kept on the balcony, the ones Daniel used to tease me about because I always managed to keep them alive. Somehow. Even when I could not keep myself together. I heard the front door open and close, following by Marissa calling my name in a voice that was far too cheerful for someone who had just let herself into my home. She walked through the living room with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. Then she stood in the center of the room and slowly turned a full circle, taking in every inch of the condo like she was inspecting it for value, rather than appreciating its beauty. "You really do not need all this space," she said, tapping her fingers against the back of a chair. Not for just one person. There had been a time when comments like that were framed as jokes. Light, playful. Now her tone had shifted. There was no trace of humor, only expectation. Only a suggestion disguised as an observation. I told her the space felt right to me. I told her it made me feel calm, grounded. I told her that living here helped me breathe again after losing Daniel. She shrugged like none of that mattered. She moved toward the balcony, slid the door open, stepped outside, and rested her elbows on the railing. The wind lifted her hair as she stared at the water. "Places like this were meant for families," she said lightly, "not someone living alone." The words hit deeper than she probably intended, or maybe she intended exactly that. Either way, it stung, as if my grief made me undeserving of space, as if losing my husband had also forfeited my right to keep anything we had once dreamed of. She stayed for dinner that night. I made roasted chicken and vegetables, simple but comforting. She barely touched her food. She picked at the edges of her plate and kept glancing around the room, mentally rearranging things the way she wanted them. Halfway through the meal, she said she had something important to talk about. Her tone shifted into something deliberate, steady. She said she and Evan had been talking about starting a family someday soon. She said they needed a stable place, a good environment to raise a child. And then she said that since I did not really use all the space here, since I lived alone and spent so much time just working and keeping to myself, maybe it would make sense for me to move somewhere smaller and let them build a life here instead. She looked at me across the table like this plan was obvious, reasonable. I felt heat rise in my chest. The air in the room seemed to thicken. I set my fork down and stared at her, trying to understand how she could say something like that without flinching. I told her no. I told her calmly, without raising my voice. The condo was the one part of my life that had not been taken from me. It was the place Daniel and I had wanted to build our future. It was the only home that felt like mine in years. It was my line, and I was not crossing it for her or anyone else. She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. She said I was being dramatic. She said I was letting grief cloud my judgment. She said Daniel would have wanted me to help family. Hearing her use his name like a bargaining chip made something deep inside me twist, painfully. I told her she did not get to speak for him. She rolled her eyes and said I was being sensitive. The conversation dissolved after that. She pushed her food around her plate until she finally put her napkin down and said she had to get going. When she hugged me goodbye at the door, her arms were stiff, her body cold against mine. She said she hoped I would think about it and not make things harder than they needed to be. Then she walked out, without looking back. The next week, she invited me to dinner near her apartment, a small place with dim lighting and checkered tablecloths. She had picked a corner booth. Evan joined us this time, sitting beside her, their bodies pressed together like a united front. We ordered salads. Marissa kept adjusting her napkin, smoothing it over and over. When the server left, she went straight back to the condo conversation. She said she had been doing research and had found several nice apartments I could move into that were reasonably priced and easier for one person to maintain. She said it would be a fresh start for me. She said it would mean everything to her and Evan. I took a sip of water and said again, as plainly as before, that I was not giving them my home. The look she gave me then was a mixture of disbelief and something sharper. She said I had always been so generous, so helpful, so supportive. She said she did not understand why I was suddenly clinging to something that was clearly too much for one person. She suggested gently, almost sweetly, that maybe this was part of my problem, that maybe holding on to the condo was holding me back from real healing. I felt my fingers tighten around the edge of my glass. I said the condo was not up for discussion. She asked why. I told her because it held memories that mattered to me, because Daniel and I had talked about living somewhere like that long before the accident, because it felt like the only place that reflected the life I had once believed in. She sighed heavily, as if I were the unreasonable one. She looked at Evan, who nodded as if he had been consulted ahead of time. Then she turned back to me. She said that living alone in a large condo was wasteful, that families should come first, that I had already been blessed with the settlement and should consider how much good the condo could do for people who actually needed it. I stared at her. On the way, she straightened her shoulders. On the way, she lifted her chin. By the way, she seemed so certain that everything she was saying made sense. I told her no once more. This time, something froze between us. Something old and familiar snapped in half. She sat back slowly and said I was choosing a building over her. I told her she was choosing entitlement over love. She said I was being heartless. I said I was being honest. The rest of dinner passed in silence. There were no dramatic exits, no raised voices, just a coldness settling in the space between us like fog rolling in from the ocean. After that night, her texts became shorter. Her voice on the phone grew clipped, sharpened. When she came over, she stopped wandering the condo with curiosity and instead scanned it with irritation, like she was assessing something that should already belong to her. She stood in the doorway of the guest room and said she could picture a nursery there. She said the light was perfect in the mornings. I felt a chill run down my spine. I reminded her again that I was not moving. She shrugged, as if I had not spoken at all. Later, she made another comment, this time while standing by the balcony railing, staring at the water with narrowed eyes. She said it was sad, really, to see such a beautiful place wasted on someone who lived alone. She said the condo deserved laughter and footsteps and family. She said I had had my chance at a family, and it was gone now. So maybe it was time to let someone else have theirs. It was not a shout. It was not cruel on the surface, but the cruelty was there, layered under every word. I did not respond. I stepped inside and closed the sliding door gently between us. From that moment on, something in our relationship went silent. Not broken in a dramatic way, but severed quietly, the way fabric tears when it has been pulled too hard for too long. She still called when she needed something, but there was no warmth, no sisterhood, only expectation. I met her needs less and less. I drew boundaries she did not like, and every time I said no, even to the smallest thing, I felt the air between us grow colder. Marissa stopped seeing me as her sister the moment I stopped giving, and the moment she realized I would not give her the condo was the moment she began planning how to take it anyway. The first sign was the wedding. At the time, I did not see it for what it truly was. I thought she was simply caught up in the excitement of starting a new life, dreaming bigger than her wallet could handle. I thought Evan was indulging her fantasies because he did not know how to say no. I thought the endless bills and invoices and vendor confirmations were part of the typical chaos of planning a wedding. I was wrong. Marissa and Evan planned a celebration so extravagant it almost felt like a parody of itself. They booked the Harbor Light Grand, the same hotel she had once said she loved because the photos always looked like postcards. They ordered a cake big enough to feed an entire football team. They hired a live band, a videographer, and a photographer who charged more than my first car. They rented decorative arches, floral walls, custom lighting, a champagne tower, and a horse-drawn carriage for their arrival. All of it added up to a number they could not hope to pay. So they called me. At first, it was small things. A deposit here, a vendor fee there, a rush order for bridesmaids' dresses, a last-minute upgrade to their honeymoon suite. Marissa framed each request as a crisis, and I stepped in because saying no still felt cruel. The problem was never the individual amount. It was the steady drip of expectation. The unspoken assumption that I, with my settlement money, could absorb any financial blow without feeling it. Still, every time she asked for help, I felt that same tightening in my chest, the same discomfort. And each time I told myself that helping with the wedding was harmless, that it was temporary, that this one event would not define the rest of our lives. But in the back of my mind, the truth whispered quietly, this is not about the wedding. This is about ownership. The condo came up more often the closer the wedding day approached, sometimes in jokes, sometimes in passing comments, sometimes in not-so-subtle hints. She would walk through my living room and stop in front of the windows, staring out at the ocean as though she were imagining herself standing there, permanently. One afternoon, about 3 weeks before the wedding, she asked me to meet her alone at a coffee shop near her apartment. She chose a small booth in the back, the kind where people go to have conversations they do not want anyone else to. Over here. She was dressed impeccably, makeup perfect, hair curled, nails done in a shade of pale pink that looked expensive. She smiled when I sat down, but her eyes held a tension I had learned to recognize. Thanks for meeting me, she said, smoothing the napkin across her lap. I just wanted to talk before things got too busy. I nodded. I was tired. She knew it. She had been calling me constantly, sometimes twice a day, but I sat there anyway, hoping maybe this would be a conversation about something real. It was not. She leaned forward, her voice lowering to a confidential murmur. Evan and I have been thinking, since you have already helped so much with the wedding, and since everyone will be together, it might be the perfect moment for you to announce your real gift. My stomach dropped. I did not speak right away. I waited for her to say the words I already feared. She did. The condo. We thought you could announce it at the reception. Just imagine it. People will be so emotional. Everyone will cheer. You will make the whole night unforgettable. It would mean so much to us. I blinked slowly, trying to keep my face calm. I asked her why she would think I would give her my home. She laughed softly, as if I were being absurd. You do not need it, Nat. You live alone. You barely use half the space. You said yourself you want to focus on work and simplicity. This place is too much for one person. But for me and Evan, it would be everything. I shook my head. Marissa, no. Her smile wavered. She tried again. You gave me a car when mine was wrecked. You paid my credit cards. You covered rent when I needed it. You have already helped so much. Why not this too? This is family. This is what families do. I held her gaze and said no again, firmer this time. I told her I bought the condo because it was tied to memories I could not replace. I told her it was not a transaction. It was not a bargaining chip. It was my home, and I was not giving it away. Her face changed instantly. The softness dropped. Something sharper slid into place. You are embarrassing me, she said quietly. Everyone already knows you are paying for half the wedding. It will look cruel if you hold back now. People will think you do not support us. They will judge you for it. I stared at her. She did not flinch. I told her that public pressure was not a reason to give away my life. She leaned back and crossed her arms. Her jaw tightened. Fine, she said. But she said it with the tone of someone who was not accepting an answer, only biding her time. If you will not do it willingly, then I guess I will have to find another way to make this work. Those words should have alarmed me more than they did, but I had spent so many years smoothing over her crises that I assumed she was bluffing. I told myself she would cool down. I told myself once the wedding was over, everything would settle. I told myself she would never cross a line that could not be undone. The day of the wedding arrived too quickly. The Harborlight Grand looked exactly the way she had imagined it. Flowers draped along the staircase. Candles glowing in every corner. Guests in elegant dresses and tailored suits. Fatara's features weaving through the crowd, capturing posed happiness. I stood in the bridal suite as Marissa finished getting ready. She looked beautiful. Truly. Even with all the conflict between us, I felt something like nostalgia settle over me. This was my sister, the girl I grew up with, the girl I protected, the girl I helped raise. She caught my reflection in the mirror. "Make sure you are ready for your speech later," she said lightly. My heart skipped. The speech. The one she still thought I would give. The one she had planned around without my consent. I told her again that nothing had changed. She froze, her eyes going hard and bright. "You are ruining this day for me," she whispered. "You are making everything harder than it needs to be. You have no idea how selfish you look." I wanted to leave then. I should have. But old habits linger like shadows. I stayed. I helped her with her veil. I told her she looked beautiful. I walked beside her until the ceremony began. For a while, the evening went smoothly. Vows, applause, champagne, dancing. I let myself believe that perhaps she had accepted the boundary I had set. But when the DJ invited me to the stage, when the spotlight hit me and the room fell silent, when Marissa stepped closer with a smile stretched tight across her face, I understood why she had been so calm. She was giving me one last chance to publicly surrender. She leaned toward me and whispered so only I could hear, "Do it. Do not humiliate me." I lifted the microphone. I looked right at her. I told her I wished her and Evan a good life together. Nothing more. Her smile snapped. Her voice rose. And then everything broke. I did not know until the slap landed across my cheek that this moment had been her final move. The last attempt to force me into a role I no longer accepted. The last chance she gave herself to take from me what I refused to give. And I walked off that stage thinking it would end there. But that was only the beginning. The drive home that night felt strangely quiet, even though my thoughts were loud. Enough to fill the car. The sting on my cheek had faded into a warm throb, but the humiliation clung to me like smoke. I could still see Marissa's eyes, wide and shining with anger. Still hear the soft gasp that moved through the crowd right after her hand struck. My face still feel the weight of every phone lifted to record what should have been a private moment between two sisters. But nothing about it had been private. She made sure of that. By the time I got home, the night air felt heavy against my skin. I peeled off my shoes and sat on the couch without turning on a single light. The ocean outside was dark, the water barely visible except when moonlight caught the waves. I stared at it for a long time. The quiet should have soothed me, but there was a buzzing under my ribs. A kind of disbelief mixed with something deeper, something like grief. The first message came just after midnight. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. Then it buzzed again. And again. I reached for it reluctantly, already knowing the tone I would find. The first voicemail was from Aunt Linda. She launched straight into it, her voice tight with judgment. "It is just money, Natalie. She is your sister. She is starting a family. Why would you embarrass her like that on her wedding day?" She did not mention the slap. Not once. Another message followed from a cousin I had not spoken to in months. He sounded irritated. "You could have handled it better. Everybody knows you are comfortable. What is the big deal?" She needed help. She is family. You made her look desperate. He ended the message with a sigh, as if I had burdened him personally. A third message came from someone whose name I did not even save in my contacts anymore. She had been one of my mom's friends. All she said was, "You should fix this. It is your responsibility." Responsibility. The word hit like a stone dropped into still water. My responsibility. As if somehow, by surviving Daniel's accident and managing the settlement wisely, I had become obligated to give away whatever anyone wanted from me. My phone kept vibrating through the night. Messages, missed calls, short texts that said things like, "Be the bigger person. Fix what you broke. Stop being selfish. Think about her future." Not one person asked if I was all right. Not one mentioned the violence. Not one said they had seen the rage in Marissa's eyes or heard the words she had screamed at me. They looked at the money. They looked at the condo. They looked at the narrative Marissa had already begun crafting, and they decided I owed her. The next morning, the sunlight streaming through the windows felt too bright. I made coffee but barely drank it. I sat at the kitchen counter staring at the steam rising from the mug as if it could help me understand how everything had spiraled so fast. I kept replaying the scene at the wedding. The lights, the silence, the sharp crack of her hand against my skin. The way she did not look horrified afterward, but triumphant, as if my refusal had been the only thing standing between her and some imagined victory. I rubbed my cheek gently and felt a small swell beneath the skin. A bruise was forming. I touched it and felt something flicker inside me, something fragile and tired. Then I remembered the woman standing near the back of the ballroom, the older woman in the emerald dress, the one whose eyes had followed everything with a sharp, assessing calm. I remembered the way she had stared at Marissa after the slap. Not shocked, not scandalized. More like she had been expecting something like this. Her face drifted through my mind again and again until I finally understood why. She did not look confused because she had recognized the moment for what it was. Not a family outburst, not a dramatic slip, but a boundary being broken with intent. I did not know her name then. I only remembered her expression. Later that afternoon, after I finally showered and tried to pull myself together, I stepped outside my condo to get the mail. The hallway felt cooler than usual, the air conditioning humming steadily above my head. When I turned the corner toward the elevator, I nearly stopped walking. She was standing there. The woman from the wedding. Her silver hair was pulled back, and she wore a simple navy blouse with pressed slack. But there was something effortlessly elegant about her. She held a small clutch in her hands and looked up the moment she heard my footsteps. "You must be Natalie," she said. Her voice was smooth, calm, and surely practiced. She extended a hand, and I shook it automatically, even as my mind raced. "I am Naomi Whitaker," she said. "I was invited through a friend of a friend. Long story. But I saw what happened." A wave of embarrassment washed over me. I glanced toward the elevator, wishing for a moment that it would arrive so I could hide in its quiet metal walls. "I'm sorry you had to see that," I said softly. She tilted her head, her eyes steady. "Do not apologize for someone else's violence." The words struck so cleanly that I felt myself go still. She continued speaking gently, almost conversationally. "That was not an emotional mistake or a moment of stress. That was entitlement. And entitlement, when threatened, becomes aggression. It is never about the thing being taken or held. It is about control. Your sister wanted control of you. When she lost it, she lashed out." I swallowed. My throat felt tight, as if her words pressed against something I had been refusing to acknowledge. She studied my face quietly before asking, "Are you safe?" The question startled me. I opened my mouth to answer, but hesitated. Safe. I had not thought about safety. I had thought about betrayal, shame, anger, but not safety. "Yes," I said after a moment. "I think so." "Good," she said, "because you need to understand something very clearly. What happened last night was not the end of this. It was the escalation. People who believe they are owed what belongs to others do not simply give up when told no. They shift their tactics." A soft chime sounded as the elevator doors opened behind her, but she did not step inside. She kept her eyes on mine. "Protect yourself, legally, emotionally, financially. Do not wait for the next blow to come." Then she stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for her floor. As the doors closed, she added quietly, "You are not the villain in her story. You are the target." The elevator doors sealed shut with a muted click. I stood alone in the hallway for several minutes, her words echoing in my mind until the coldness of the air made my skin prickle. By the time I re-entered my condo, something in me had shifted. I was no longer confused. No longer trying to excuse Marissa's behavior. No longer pretending things would magically settle down. I walked to my desk, pulled out my planner, and stared at the blank page for a moment before writing a name I had been avoiding for months. Thomas Hale. He had been Daniel's attorney when we handled the settlement. Steady, direct, honest in a way most people were not. After the settlement closed, He told me I could always call him if I needed guidance in the future. I never imagined the future would look like this. I picked up my phone and dialed his office number. His assistant answered, and I felt my voice tremble lightly as I asked if he had any availability that week. She paused briefly before saying he was actually in the office and could take my many call. There was a short click, and then his voice came through the line. Warm, grounded, familiar. Natalie. It has been a long time. How are you? I exhaled slowly. The truth rose to the surface before I could soften it. Not good, I said. I think I need help. He did not ask in what way. He asked only, tell me what happened. So I told him. Not everything, not yet, but enough. Enough for him to go quiet for a moment. Enough for him to say something that mirrored Naomi's warning almost perfectly. What you are describing is not a misunderstanding. It is a pattern, and patterns like this do not disappear. They escalate. You need to protect yourself before she tries something you cannot undo. I stared out at the water through my living room windows. The sun was setting, and the sky was streaked with colors that reminded me of watercolor paintings. Soft oranges, pale pinks, deep purples. Beautiful, but fading fast. What do I do? I asked quietly. We start with documentation, he said, and boundaries. Real ones. Not the kind you give her verbally. The kind supported by paper. It will feel strange to take legal precautions against a family, but from what you have described, Natalie, she is not treating you like family. I nodded slowly, even though he could not see me. All right, I said. Tell me what to do. When I ended the call, I felt strangely calm, as if the entire room had stopped spinning around me. I set the phone on the table and pressed my palms against the surface, grounding myself in the coolness of the wood. For the first time since the wedding, my breath felt steady. I knew now that I was not overreacting. I was not imagining things. I was not cruel or selfish or dramatic. I had simply reached the limit of how much I could give. And Marissa had decided that my refusal was an offense she needed to correct. The hallway was quiet. The ocean outside was soft and rhythmic. Somewhere far below, a car engine hummed to life and faded into the distance. I stood there for a long time, letting the silence settle around me, because I understand now. This story was not about a slap. It was about everything that came after it. The days that followed felt strangely quiet, like the calm that settles over the ocean before a storm. I moved through my routines carefully, noticing how the condo seemed to hold its breath with me. I worked from the dining table, took walks along the shoreline in the mornings, made simple meals, and tried to settle the tension that kept rising in the back of my throat. Thomas had asked me to document everything, so I wrote. Every call, every message, every shift in Marissa's tone. But as I learned very quickly, people who feel entitled to your life do not wait long before trying again. It was late afternoon when the knock came at my door. 3 sharp taps. Firm, not hesitant, not gentle. I froze halfway across the living room. I had not been expecting anyone. I walked slowly toward the door and looked through the peephole. My stomach tightened. Marissa stood there, flanked by Evan and Aunt Linda. All 3 of them wore expressions that pretended to be soft, but were too controlled, too coordinated. They looked like people rehearsing sympathy. I opened the door halfway, enough to speak, but not enough for them to walk in. "What are you doing here?" I asked. Marissa smiled. It was the same smile she used when she wanted something expensive. "We came to talk. Can we come in?" I hesitated, but stepped aside reluctantly. They walked in like a team entering a meeting they had prepared for. Marissa settled onto the couch without waiting to be offered a seat. Evan stood behind her, hands clasped. Aunt Linda lowered herself into one of the dining chairs and folded her purse into her lap, her expression cloudy with concern. The air felt heavy. Marissa began with a sigh. "I owe you an apology for the wedding. Things got out of hand. I was emotional. It was a big day." She looked up at me through her lashes, waiting for me to soften. I did not. "I appreciate the apology," I said. But the conversation ended there. Her smile tightened. "Actually, no, it did not." Evan stepped forward then, pulling a neatly folded stack of papers from the inside pocket of his jacket. They were crisp, freshly printed, clipped together at the top. I felt the floor shift beneath me. "We were hoping you would sign these," he said quietly. "It is a simple power of attorney. Just temporary, Nothing drastic. The words cut straight through the air. My throat tightened. Why would I sign something like that? Marissa stood and walked toward me, moving slowly like someone approaching a frightened animal. Nat, we are concerned about you. You have been under a lot of stress. The settlement. Losing Daniel. Being alone in this place. We just want to help manage things for you so you do not make decisions you will regret. Her voice was syrup, thick, artificially sweet. I shook my head. I do not need anyone managing my life. Aunt Linda chimed in with a soft cluck of disapproval. Honey, everyone sees you have been struggling. You are isolated out here. You do not always think clearly. Sometimes help is what strong people need. My heart thudded once, hard. They were not here to apologize. They were here to corner me. Marissa took another step, lowering her voice. If you sign this, we can help with the condo. Keep it in the family. Make sure things stay organized. It is just practical. That is all we want. The condo. Of course it came down to that. I looked at the papers in Evan's hand, my name printed on the first page. The lines ready for signatures, the words that would strip me of control over my own property if I made the mistake of letting fear or guilt guide my hand. I straightened my shoulders. I am not signing anything. The shift in the room was immediate. Marissa's face hardened. Nat, you are being paranoid, Evan added quietly. You are not thinking clearly. Aunt Linda shook her head. You have gotten so defensive. This is exactly what we are worried about. Their voices layered, one on top of the other, forming a wall of accusation. Paranoid, confused, isolated, not thinking clearly. It was a script designed to make me doubt myself. A slow psychological erosion meant to push me toward compliance. But something inside me had changed since the wedding. Something Naomi had awakened with her quiet warning. Something Thomas had reinforced with his steady voice. I was not losing my mind. I was losing my tolerance. I lifted my chin. I already spoke to a lawyer. The silence that followed was sharp. Marissa's eyes widened. Not with fear, but with indignation. You talked to a lawyer about your own family. I let the question hang in the air for a moment, then said yes. Aunt Linda leaned back as if I had slapped her. This is what I mean. You are acting irrational. Evan stepped forward again. You are misinterpreting everything. We are trying to help you, but if you get lawyers involved, it is going to turn messy for no reason. There was a thin thread of warning in his voice, a quiet threat wrapped in civility. I looked at all three of them. Their expectant faces, their frustration, their disbelief that I would dare to protect myself. Then I pointed to the door. This conversation is over. You all need to leave. Marissa blinked several times, stunned. You are choosing them over me. I shook my head. I am choosing my life over your expectations. She stared at me with a sharpness I had never seen in her eyes before. Cold, cutting. Like she was seeing me not as her sister, but as an obstacle. You will regret this. Her voice dropped into a low whisper. Mark my words. You will regret this. I did not respond. I opened the door wider. They walked out slowly. Marissa was the last to leave. She stopped just before crossing the threshold and looked back at me, her expression a storm waiting to break. Then she stepped into the hallway and I shut the door behind them. The moment the latch clicked, my legs weakened. I leaned against the wood, feeling the weight of my own heartbeat. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from anger. A quiet, simmering anger that rose through me like heat. I crossed the living room and went straight to the balcony. The ocean stretched out wide and steady, the waves rolling in slow patterns. I breathed deeply. Once, twice. Then I turned around and started doing what Thomas told me to do. Document everything. I wrote down the time they arrived, the words they used, the way they tried to frame my sanity as unstable, the pressure to sign the documents. The moment I told them I had a lawyer, every detail, every shift in tone. And then I made another decision. I called the building management office. A man named Carl picked up. His voice was cheerful, the kind of cheer that comes from spending all day behind a desk, where the biggest emergencies are leaky drains or lost key fob. I explained that I needed to change the locks on my condo, not the standard maintenance change, but a full replacement. He asked if I had misplaced a key. I told him no. He hesitated. Is this a safety issue? I paused, letting the truth form fully in my mind before speaking it out loud. Yes, he did not ask anything else. He scheduled the locksmith for early the next morning. After hanging up, I walked slowly across the condo, touching the back of the couch, the edge of the kitchen counter, the door frame that led down the hallway. This home had been my refuge for years, but in the past month, it had begun to feel threatened. I went to the front door and locked it. Then I locked the secondary latch. Then I tested it twice. The condo felt quieter than usual, but it felt like my space again. The air seemed to settle around me gently, like the apartment itself exhaled in relief. I made tea and sat at the small table near the window. The sky was dimming, shifting into twilight blues and purples. For a moment, I let the warmth of the mug seep into my palms. But beneath that moment of calm, something else stirred. A realization. Marissa had not come today to reconcile. She had come to claim what she believed she was owed. And when I refused her once again, she did what entitled people do. She changed her strategy. She shifted the narrative. She tried to convince me and the rest of the family that I was unstable, unreliable, unable to manage my own life. If she could get people to believe that, then she could justify taking control. I sipped the tea slowly. She thought she was winning. She thought questioning my mind would weaken me. She thought I would fold under pressure. But she had forgotten something important. I had walked through deeper darkness than this. I had survived grief that tore me apart. I had built myself again from pieces that did not want to fit back together. I had learned how to keep breathing when the world tried to bury me. I was not the fragile thing she imagined. When the locksmith arrived the next morning and installed the new lock, I watched the old one fall into his tool bucket with a dull thud. A quiet, definitive sound. A line being drawn. A boundary being set. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the faintest spark of strength settle in my chest. This was my home, and I was done opening the door for anyone who intended to take it. That small spark of strength settled in my chest as the locksmith packed up his tools and left. But it had barely begun to warm me before the next blow arrived. It came 2 mornings later, when the sun was just beginning to lighten the edges of the sky, and the condo was still quiet enough that I could hear the slow hum of the refrigerator from across the room. A knock sounded on my door. Not loud, not urgent, but officially in a way that sent a cold ripple down my back. I set my coffee mug on the counter and walked slowly toward the sound. Through the peephole, I saw a woman standing there, holding a leather binder against her chest. She looked to be in her 40s, with calm, observant eyes, and her dark hair pulled into a low ponytail. She was dressed neatly, but not like someone from the police or a delivery service. I knew before I opened the door. I opened it halfway. "Good morning," she said with a small, professional smile. "Are you Natalie Hartley?" "Yes," I said. "My name is Renee Miller. I am with the county's Adult Protective Services. I would like to speak with you for a few minutes, if that is all right." The floor seemed to shift under my feet. My breath caught, but I forced my face to stay neutral. "Of course. Come in." I stepped aside and let her enter. She walked in slowly, taking in the living room, the open kitchen, the soft light coming through the balcony windows. Her gaze was steady, but not intrusive. She was noting the details the way someone might examine a puzzle before deciding where to start. "Thank you for letting me in," she said, as she stood near the dining table. "I know visits like this can feel unexpected." Unexpected was an understatement. She opened her binder and glanced at a sheet clipped inside. "We received a report expressing concern about your well-being. The caller stated that you may be experiencing confusion, difficulty managing daily tasks, possible financial mismanagement, and potential vulnerability due to isolation." My stomach tightened. Every word felt like it had been pulled directly from the conversation in my living room days earlier. Marissa. Of course it was her. I took a slow breath and nodded for Renee to continue. "Before we go any further," she said gently, "I want to be clear about something. A report does not mean guilt. It does not mean we assume the information is correct. It simply means we are required to follow up in person." Her voice was steady, compassionate without being patronizing. It surprised me enough that some of the tension in my chest loosened. "Would it be all right if I ask you a few questions and take a brief look around? Your home. Yes, I said. That is fine. She began with simple things. How long I have lived here. My daily routine. My work schedule, whether I had friends nearby, whether anyone helped me with bills or household responsibilities. Her eyes never left me for long, but she did not look at me the way Evan and Marissa had. There was no accusation, no suspicion dripping between the lines. She was trying to understand, not to trap me. After a few minutes, she closed the binder lightly. Thank you. Now, if it is all right, I would like to walk through the condo. I gestured for her to look around. She walked through the hallway, glanced into the bedrooms, stepped briefly into the kitchen, checked the fire extinguisher tucked between the pantry and the cabinets, and casually noted the organized shelves, labeled storage bins, and neatly stacked mail on the counter. When she passed the framed photo of Daniel and me on the bookshelf, she paused for just a moment, her gaze softening. She returned to the living room and sat down at the dining table, motioning for me to sit across from her. I took my seat slowly, hands folded in my lap. She studied me for a moment. Natalie, your home is spotless. Your utilities appear to be current. You have food in the fridge, medications stored properly, and I saw nothing suggesting you are unable to manage daily life. You seem oriented, articulate, and aware. So I want to ask you directly, do you feel confused or unsafe in any way? No, I said, absolutely not. Has anyone tried to convince you otherwise? There it was, the question. I exhaled, my breath shaky. Yes. She sat a little straighter. Can you tell me who? My sister, her husband, some relatives. I paused. They came here 2 days ago asking me to sign a power of attorney. When I refused, they said I was paranoid and confused. Renee did not react outwardly. She only flipped to another page and made a brief note. And do you feel you need someone to manage your finances or property? Decisions? No. I manage everything myself. I have for years. Do you have a lawyer? Yes. His name is Thomas Hale. I contacted him last week. She nodded, writing that down as well. Would you like to tell me why you think your sister filed the report? I hesitated, not because I did not know, but because saying it aloud made the truth feel heavier. She wants my condo. Renee looked up, her expression calm but more focused now. And is it valuable? Yes. It is worth around $740,000. It was purchased using part of a $2 million settlement I received after my husband died. I waited for her to show surprise or sympathy or judgment. She did none of those things. She simply nodded and made another note. Has your sister asked for the condo before? Yes, many times. Has she ever asked for large amounts of money? Yes. Has she ever repaid anything? No. When you refused her most recent request, did her behavior change? Yes. She became angry, and then she slapped me at her wedding, in front of 250 people. Renee's eyes widened just slightly. That was not in the report. Of course it was not. Marissa would not have mentioned the part that made her look unhinged. I told her the rest slowly. Not dramatically, just plainly, the way someone would read back facts from a ledger. The wedding, the staged apology, the power of attorney, the accusations when I refused. The family members pressured me afterward. The sudden shift to narrative building. When I finished speaking, Renee closed her binder completely and sat back in her chair. Natalie, I need to tell you something, she said gently. Reports like this sometimes come from family members who are truly concerned, but there are also cases where the motivation is financial. When someone stands to gain from controlling another person's assets, false reports can be used to justify petitions for guardianship. The word guardianship sent a cold shiver up my spine. She continued softly, watching my reaction. Guardianship removes a person's legal ability to manage their finances, property, and sometimes even their medical decisions. It is not something granted casually, but once in place, it is very difficult to undo. I felt my fingers press into the fabric of my pants. Are you saying that is what she is trying to do? I cannot know her exact intent, Renee said, but based on what I have seen today, you are clearly able to manage your own life. You are not confused. You are not mismanaging anything. You are not isolated to a dangerous degree. This condo is safe. You are safe. There is nothing here that suggests incapacity. Her voice was steady and reassuring, but the anxiety gripping my chest did not fade. Then she added a sentence that made my entire body go still. However, the report was only one part. There is something else you need to see. She reached into her binder and removed a folded document with a blue stamp across and the top. She slid it across the table toward me. My heart hammered as I opened it. It was a petition for emergency guardianship, filed by Marissa Hartley. My hands trembled as I scanned the accusations. Confusion, emotional instability, inability to manage finances, isolation, vulnerability, potential endangerment of self due to grief, lies, all of it, crafted carefully, strategically, designed to make me look like someone incapable of saying no. A faint ringing filled my ears. My vision narrowed. The room felt too small, too bright. Renee's voice reached through the fog. Natalie, I need you to listen, because this is now a legal matter. The court has not granted anything, but the petition is active. You will need to respond. And you will need representation. I forced myself to breathe. Slow, steady, deep. I will call my lawyer, I whispered. Good, she said gently. He will guide you from here. She stood, giving me time to gather myself. At the door, she paused. For what it is worth, I believe the report was not made out of concern for your well-being, and I will be writing that in my evaluation. I nodded, unable to speak. When she left, the condo felt unbearably quiet. I sat at the dining table and stared at the petition until my eyes blurred. My whole body shook. Not with fear exactly, but with the shock of realizing how far Marissa was willing to go. She wanted the condo. She wanted control. And now she wanted the law to hand both to her. I folded the paper with unsteady fingers and placed it on the table beside my planner. Outside the balcony doors, the sun dipped lower, turning the ocean a deep shade of blue. The knock at the door had changed everything, because now it was not just family I was up against. It was not just the state. It was my sister steering it toward me like a weapon she believed she had every right to use. The days leading up to the hearing felt unreal, like I was watching someone else's life from a distance. Thomas walked me through each step calmly, never rushing, never dramatizing, but the seriousness in his voice told me everything. An emergency guardianship petition was not a small thing. It was a statement that I was unfit to control my own life. If granted, Marissa could have gained access to my accounts, my home, my medical decisions, everything that gave me independence, and she had filed it without hesitation. The morning of the hearing, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom and smoothed the fabric of my navy blouse. My hands were steady, surprisingly steady, but inside my chest a dull echo pounded against my ribs. I took a long breath, whispered a quiet prayer to the memory of Daniel, and picked up my purse. The courthouse was smaller than I expected, tucked between an insurance office and a bakery that smelled like cinnamon. I walked through the metal detector and followed Thomas down a hallway lined with benches. The fluorescent lights cast a tired glow across the floor. A few people waited outside other courtrooms, some anxious, some bored, some hiding behind folded paperwork. We were early. Thomas liked it that way. We sat together on the long wooden bench while he reviewed documents. He looked composed, confident. I held on to that. Then my sister turned the corner. Marissa wore a pale gray dress, tasteful jewelry, and a soft hairstyle that made her look delicate and worried. She carried a folder pressed to her chest. Evan walked beside her, eyes down, shoulders slightly hunched, as if he hoped no one would look at him too closely. They approached slowly, and when Marissa saw me, she arranged her expression into a mix of pity and sadness. "Natalie," she said softly, like she was greeting a patient in a hospital. "I wish it had not come to this." Thomas stood before I could answer. "We will speak inside," he said firmly, "not here." Marissa's lips tightened. She nodded and stepped away, but not before giving me a lingering look, the kind of person gives when they believe they have already won. The bailiff opened the door to the small courtroom and everyone filed in. The room had only 2 rows of benches, a raised platform for the judge, and a handful of chairs. The walls were beige, the ceiling low, the carpet worn thin. It was not a dramatic space, yet the air inside felt heavy. I sat beside Thomas at the respondents' table. Marissa and Evan sat across from us. Aunt Linda arrived minutes later and took a seat behind them, her presence a silent reinforcement of their narrative. The judge entered, an older man with thinning gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He adjusted his glasses as he sat. "We are here regarding petition 0715, concerning emergency guardianship from Miss Natalie Hartley. Will counsel please introduce themselves?" Thomas stood smoothly. "Good morning, Your Honor. Thomas Hale for the respondent, Ms. Hartley." A woman at the other table stood as well. "Good morning, Your Honor. Claire Walters for the petitioners, Marissa and Evan Hartley." The judge nodded, glanced through the brief file before him, and spoke. "This is an emergency petition. The burden is high. I expect clear, factual evidence to support any claim of incapacity or imminent risk." That word, incapacity, sounded foreign in the air, as if it belonged in someone else's life. Claire began. She stepped forward in her perfectly tailored suit, her posture confident, her tone smooth. "Your Honor, the petitioners are here today out of genuine concern. Miss Hartley has shown signs of deteriorating mental clarity over the past several weeks, months. Emotional instability, difficulty managing finances, increasing isolation. She has made decisions that endanger her own well-being, and her family fears she may be vulnerable to exploitation or self-harm." I felt my jaw tighten. Exploitation. Self-harm. None of it was true. Marissa dabbed her eyes with a tissue, perfectly timed. Claire continued. "In addition, recent events demonstrate confusion and impaired judgment. We will present testimony and recordings showing erratic behavior." Erratic. The word twisted my stomach. Thomas rose calmly. "Your Honor, my client is fully capable, financially stable, and mentally sound. The evidence will show this petition was filed not out of concern, but out of financial motivation." Claire bristled. "Your Honor, we object to that characterization." Overruled, the judge said simply. "Continue." Thomas nodded and sat. The judge motioned toward the petitioners. "Call your first witness." Marissa walked to the stand with the air of someone stepping into a spotlight she had been practicing for. She raised her hand, swore to tell the truth, then settled in her chair with another well-timed sniffle. "Miss Hartley," Claire said gently, "can you describe your concerns about your sister?" Marissa folded her hands delicately. "Natalie has changed. She isolates herself. She fixates on sentimental things. She refuses help even when it is clear she needs it. She forgets things. She gets overwhelmed easily. She has trouble making decisions. And honestly, Your Honor, I am scared she is being taken advantage of. She is alone, and she is vulnerable." Claire nodded sympathetically. "Can you give an example of this confusion?" Marissa paused, swallowing dramatically. "The night of my wedding." I felt the courtroom tilt for a moment. Marissa continued. "She was supposed to give a toast. She had rehearsed it. We talked about it for weeks. But when the moment came, she froze. She said something completely unrelated. Then she got upset and walked off the stage. She ruined the moment. It was like she was not fully aware of what was happening. Every word was a lie." Claire nodded again. "Your Honor, we have video of the incident to support this." Thomas stood quickly. "Your Honor, we object to selective interpretation. If a video is shown, it must be shown in full." The judge tapped his pen once. "Play the entire recording." Claire hesitated, but nodded to the bailiff. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as a screen lowered from the wall. A projector hummed. Then the footage began. The ballroom appeared, glittering with lights. The music lowered. I saw myself walking to the microphone. A pit formed in my stomach as the moment replayed on the screen. The audio was picked up. Marissa's voice. "Say it. Go on. Tell them." Then my voice, steady and calm, saying I wished her and Evan well. The room in the video fell silent. Then Marissa's voice rose. "You are alone. You have been alone for years. I am getting married. I deserve it more." My chest tightened as the courtroom watched my sister's face contort with entitlement. Then her hand flashed across the screen, and struck my cheek. The sound echoed even through the speakers. Gasps filled the courtroom, small but sharp. The camera panned to the crowd, catching confused faces, raised phones, and whispered shock. The video ended. Silence pressed over the room like a weight. Thomas rose slowly. Your Honor, the incident speaks for itself. My client is not confused. She refused to give her home to the petitioners, and this was the result. Her refusal was calm, specific, rational. The retaliation was not. Claire scrambled. Your Honor, that clip does not capture the months of decline. It only shows a moment of heightened emotion. The judge lifted a hand. I saw what I saw. Thomas stepped toward the center. The defense calls Naomi Whitaker. My breath caught. Naomi walked down the aisle with quiet confidence. She wore a simple navy suit, her silver hair pulled back, her eyes alert and unwavering. She took the oath and sat. Thomas began. Miss Whitaker, were you present at the wedding event shown in the recording? Yes. Did you witness the interaction between the two sisters? Yes. I was standing near the back. How would you describe what you saw? Naomi folded her hands. It was not confusing. And it was not emotional instability on Natalie's part. What I witnessed was entitlement escalating into aggression. The sister demanded a large piece of property. When she did not get it, she retaliated publicly. That is not caretaking. That is coercion. Claire stood sharply. Objection. Speculation. The judge shook his head. The witness observed the behavior firsthand. Overruled. Naomi continued. I have spent 30 years working with elder financial abuse cases. The patterns are familiar. Pressure, manipulation, questioning the victim's capacity, attempting to isolate them, using legal tools to seize control. This case matches those patterns. A quiet murmur moved through the small gallery seats. Thomas approached the bench calmly. Your Honor, we also have the APS evaluation completed by Ms. Renee Miller. Renee stood from a nearby bench and approached. She identified herself as the county social worker assigned to the report. She stated clearly that she found no evidence of confusion, incapacity, or mismanagement. She stated the home was safe, the utilities current, the finances organized, the respondent coherent and independent. The judge listened carefully, his eyes narrowing slightly with each contradiction to the petition. When Renee finished, Thomas placed a final document on the judge's desk. Bank statements, receipts, maintenance logs, legal documents, proof that I handled every aspect of my life without difficulty. The judge leaned back in his chair and looked directly at Marissa. Ms. Hartley, please stand. Marissa rose slowly, confusion flickering over her face. The judge adjusted his glasses. This petition is not only unsupported, it appears to have been filed with misrepresentation and personal motivation. The evidence shows no incapacity, no confusion, no financial mismanagement, and no isolation requiring intervention. What it does show is an attempt to obtain control over your sister's property through legal pressure. This is a misuse of the guardianship process. Marissa opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The judge continued. The petition is denied in full. Furthermore, this court issues a formal warning. Any future petitions without substantial evidence may result in sanctions. The words fell with the weight of justice. Denied. Denied completely. The judge struck his gavel lightly. This hearing is adjourned. Marissa sank into her chair, her face pale, her hands trembling. Evan stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Aunt Linda looked stunned, as if reality itself had betrayed her understanding of the world. I felt a long, slow breath leave my body. Not relief, not triumph. Something quieter, something steadier, something like reclaiming air I had forgotten belonged to me. Thomas touched my shoulder lightly. It is over, he said. But as I gathered my things and stepped out of the courtroom, I knew one thing clearly. This was not the end. When I walked out of that courtroom, the morning air felt different, lighter somehow. Not because anything had gone back to the way it used to be. That was impossible now. It was lighter because the last illusion had finally dissolved. Whatever version of family I had been holding on to, whatever hope that Marissa might someday remember the girls we used to be, whatever belief that loyalty and sacrifice could still bridge the gap between us, all of it had finally loosened its grip on me. Thomas walked beside me down the courthouse steps. He did not rush me. He did not try to summarize the hearing or reassure me. He simply stayed near, letting silence settle in the place where panic had lived for weeks. When we reached the parking lot, he turned to me. "You handled yourself with strength, Natalie." I nodded, though I did not feel strong. I felt emptied, cleaned in the way a person feels after a long cry they never intended to have. "Thank you," I said quietly, "for everything." "Call me if anything else happens," he said. But I have a feeling this was the end of her legal attempts. He was right. Legally, it was over. Emotionally, something far deeper had ended too. I drove home with the windows cracked open. The wind pushed through the car, carrying away the remnants of fear that had settled into every corner of my body. By the time I pulled into the condo garage, I felt steadier. My footsteps echoed softly through the hallway as I walked toward my front door. When I stepped inside, the condo felt warm in a way it had not felt in months, like it was mine again. Not as a fortress or a battleground, but as a home. I set my keys on the counter and stood for a long moment, listening to the quiet. That was when my phone buzzed. A message from Marissa. 3 words: "You chose wrong." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred, not because I believed her, but because that text was the final proof I needed. She was not reaching out in grief. She was not trying to mend anything. She was lashing out because she had lost control of something she believed was hers. I did not reply. I blocked her number. Then I sat down at the dining table and let the silence settle again. Cut ties with your last surviving sibling is not something anyone prepares you for. There is no handbook, no neat path. There is only the quiet ache of what should have been. There is the memory of childhood laughter, and the reminder that adulthood can twist people in ways you never imagined. There is the grief of losing someone who is still alive, but there is also the relief of finally stepping out of a role that was slowly destroying you. For the first time in years, I did not feel the obligation to rescue anyone. The next few weeks moved slowly, calmly. I took time off work, not because I was falling apart, but because I wanted to breathe without looking over my shoulder. I slept better. I walked along the beach with my coffee in the mornings. I cleaned the condo from top to bottom, not because it needed it, but because I wanted to reclaim every inch of space that had been tainted by fear. Then I sat down with a financial planner Thomas recommended and made a real plan. A long-term one this time. I invested a portion of the remaining settlement in accounts that would give me stable monthly returns. Not extravagant, not reckless. Just steady income I could rely on without fear that the bottom would fall out from under me again. The condo remained the place I came home to, but it no longer felt like the last piece of my old life I had to protect. It felt like the foundation of the new life I was choosing. And for the first time since Daniel died, I let myself dream. I booked a trip. Just one at first. A small step. Seattle in the spring. That was where Daniel and I had planned to go for our 5th anniversary. We never made it there. I had kept that dream tucked away in a drawer like a fragile letter I could not bear to read. I stood at the window of a hotel near the harbor and watched ferries glide across the water. I imagined Daniel beside me. I let the memory be soft instead of sharp. From there I went other places we had talked about. Palm Springs, Charleston, a tiny coastal town in Maine where the mornings smelled like pine and salt. I finally saw the places we had circled in guidebooks. I walked streets we had once traced with our fingers, but I did not travel to run away. I traveled to inhabit my life again. Each time I returned home, I opened the balcony doors and let the ocean air in. The condo no longer felt like a monument to grief. It felt like an anchor, something steady in a world that had shifted beneath me more times than I could count. I thought often about the cost of what had happened. Not the financial cost, the personal one. I had lost my sister. I had lost the illusion that family is always a place of safety. I had lost the version of myself who believed that love could fix someone bent on taking. But I had gained something too. I learned that boundaries are not walls. They are doors you close gently but firmly. I learned that saying no does not make you unkind. It makes you whole. I learned that survival is not about holding on to everyone. Sometimes it is about letting go of the person who refuses to stop hurting you. I stood on the balcony one evening as the sun sank low over the horizon. The waves rolled in with a slow, rhythmic breath. My hands rested lightly on the railing. I thought of my mom and dad. I thought of the little girl Marissa used to be before life twisted her into someone I no longer recognized. A tear slipped down my cheek, not out of despair, but out of acceptance. The kind that feels like setting something heavy down after carrying it too long. When the breeze brushed my face, I whispered something only the ocean could hear. I am free now. Not untouched, not unchanged, but free. Later that night, as I sat on the couch with a blanket over my legs and a glass of iced tea beside me, I opened my laptop. I had been writing pieces of my story for weeks, jotting down moments I never wanted to forget and lessons I never expected to learn. And now, for the first time, I felt ready to share it. Because stories like mine do not begin with violence or end in courtrooms. They begin the moment someone decides their worth is no longer negotiable. And they end in the quiet choice to keep living. To build something steadier, something kinder, something true. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this. Silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.